Coming up, the New York Football Giants season comes to an end and nothing changes. Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll are safe. John Mara is bringing back the duo that led this team to the third overall pick and a potentially disastrous road ahead for the New York Football Giants. We'll dive into all the caveats and reasons why this could work out and what changes we expect on the staff, all coming up here next. Yes, my friends. It's OGP, the One Giant Podcast, where you know that we are your hosts over here, Adam Marmbrecht, over there, Andrew Mackowitz. We're healthy, we're wealthy, we're wise, so to speak, as we wrap up the New York Football Giants 2024-2025 season and address what actually now in this moment, Andy, doesn't feel surprising. Over the last, month and a half, we felt like all the speculation. We've been talking about who could be the next hire, the GM, the head coach. And then the last week and a half or so, 2 weeks, all of a sudden the sentiment really started to feel like it was pushing towards John Mara and ownership sitting down and saying, yeah, like we said earlier in the year, we want to believe, we want to trust the process, we want to trust Joe Schoen and the vision, and we're sticking with Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll as our head coach and our GM.
Yeah, it shouldn't be surprising to any Giant fan, given all of the breadcrumbs that have been laid out by the organization over the last few weeks. It almost felt like, our friends over at Talking Giants, Bobby Skinner got phone calls from the head of PR, Pat Hanlon, being like, "You need to stop, or else you're going to get access cut off." And we thought that was like the low point. What I'm actually also realizing is that was the moment where the organization had already decided to keep both Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll, and they basically were like, stop going around bad mouthing them because they're going to be here for another year. We need to get in front of this. Certainly could have been about 27,000 other ways they should have handled it. But to me, I kind of looking back on the last 6 to 8 weeks, that's kind of what I got from it was John Mara obviously wanted to keep Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll, and they kind of put the feelers out there through the media, to see the fan reaction, just to see how bad it would actually be if they did it. And, over the last couple of weeks, the blow kind of got softened as we heard more reports of Joe Schoen definitely being safe. Maybe Brian Daboll was going to be safe. They'd like to keep some consistency. So, it doesn't come as a shock. It's a slight disappointment for me because I think there were, and I think you would agree that there's probably other pathways that I would have ranked higher than keeping both of them. But at the very least, Adam, they didn't actually just get rid of one of them, which would have been the ultimate mess of all of this.
Yeah, maybe. Who knows? The other ways you could have gone with it, firing both of them, firing just Brian Daboll, keeping Joe Schoen, keeping Brian Daboll, and then bringing a new GM to assess. We talked about that last week as well. But ultimately, first and foremost, the official statement from co-owner John Mara. Now that our season is over, we felt it necessary to make this statement. Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll will continue in their respective roles with the organization. As disappointing as the results of the season have been, Steve Tisch and I remain confident in the process that Joe and Brian have implemented and their vision for our team. We look forward to the future and achieving the results we all desire. So there's the official statement. Okay, fine. And we heard this from him early in the season. One thing I'll say right off the top is that I'm surprised by it in that John Mara now, and this is almost ironic because when you bring up fans are flying planes over the stadium, and this is sending messages, and not even just you, it's what fans say all across social media. It matters, it happens, we've done it before. And I told him, I don't think it does matter, and I think everyone's nuts for thinking that they're going to influence them. Now, does John Mara care about how the fans feel? Of course he does 100%. But in the end, you can say the breadcrumb trail was there, which it has been over the last couple of weeks. The bottom line is this has not softened the blow at all. Every fan is still disgusted by the fact that you're keeping Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll. That's the sentiment. This is a disastrous idea. What are you going to do? You're going to leave them to pick the quarterback. We'll talk about that here coming up as well. John Mara chose to do what he believes is the best path for the organization. One of my high takeaways is that I think whether or not he does truly believe in the path going forward here, and I have a concern in that area that we can get into, the reality of all the turnover they went through under previous GMs, right? Head coaches getting 2-year stints and fired, 2-year stints and fired, 2-year stints and fired. I do think that when you sign guys to the contracts that you do, John Mara, every time he signs one of those, wants it to be that at a minimum, you make it through the life cycle of your contract, and hopefully there's extensions and the team grows and gets better. That I do think played a factor in this, in that whether or not this year went as bad as it could have or bad decisions that have been made, John Mara goes back to when we hired Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll. Joe laid out the vision, and I want to see it out, right or wrong. I think that that's a big factor in how ownership looked at this relative to anything else that was going on.
I think that I would agree with you, Adam, that I think previous scar tissue is equally as important in this one
Of
as
course.
the job that Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll actually did. Because in a vacuum, you would look at this and say, honestly, we really just need to turn over a new page and start fresh and have a new voice come in here. But unfortunately, because of everything that happened with Joe Judge, Pat Shermer, I mean, the list goes on and on in terms of like all the different coaches. Ben McAdoo has been here. Like the organization did need some stability. So, if nothing else, if what John Mara is saying is we just want to take a breath and see a process through, and if it doesn't work out on the back end, we will at least say that we have exhausted all options and we didn't have a quick trigger finger or get trigger happy or whatever you want to call it in terms of making some of these big decisions for the organization.
Here's the other thing then, though. You said that you think there's a handful of other ways that you could have gone that would have been better than keeping Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll. And I think we both, for the most part, agree if you're going to get rid of one, get rid of both, not even the version of, well, maybe new GM evaluates that want to keep Daboll, et cetera. The other part that I think is a reality is that I don't think anybody wanted to come here. I don't think that there were going to be GM candidates. Now, GMs are different, I will say, because I think there's a lot of assistant GMs that when they look, it doesn't matter if it looks like things have been run poorly. I can come in and make this better. But if we're talking about a new GM and a new head coach tandem, or the version of just a new head coach, if you thought about jettisoning Brian Daboll, because that was kind of the partition here, whether we agree or not, it seemed like Joe Schoen was always fairly safe from an organization perspective, whereas Brian Daboll was on the hot seat. We'll name the coaches that were going to be eager to come into this job. That, I think, is also a big factor in the Giants' decision to keep everything together here. Because guess what? We just heard Mike Vrabel. He was only leveraging the Jets to get the Patriots to make a move so he could get that job, right? Ben Johnson, he's going to Jacksonville, and he's going to bring his assistant GM, and that's going to be an absolute total control of every single facet of the operation. I'd name the guy. Name the guy that was going to walk in the door and come be the head coach, even just in that one role. And convince yourself, if you're ownership, that Brian Daboll is that bad of a coach, that he is that responsible for what's gone wrong here. And I'm not saying he isn't, but if you're Joe Schoen, you're lobbying to keep Brian Daboll, and then you're John Mara and you're Tisch, and you go, yeah, I mean, if we bring in the next head coach, is it gonna be better than this? Look in the mirror time. Are we breaking good football minds when they come to New York? I think that that's a big factor in this too.
Adam, Chris Rock had a sketch back in the early 90s, and it basically was like, men are only as faithful as their options. And that is a very apropos thing that you just said, because I totally agree with that piece. They started sending up those balloons up in the air to just see what was going on around the league, saying Joe Schoen's going to be back, but it's iffy on Brian Daboll, basically letting everyone know our plan is to keep Joe Schoen. Let's see what options we have if we decide to go in a different direction from Brian Daboll. And to your point, if you're Ben Johnson, sounds like he's been linked to the Jaguars job for the last couple of weeks. You talk about Mike Vrabel. It sounded like he wanted the Patriots all along, given that they have their quarterback and a ton of cap space and a number 4 overall pick. Like, it seemed to make sense. To your point, who was the person?
Yeah.
Were you going to offer it to Brian Flores and have him be the new head coach, a defensive minded coach? Were you going to go Cliff Kingsbury? Like, who was the guy that you had? And what is the assurances or guarantees that he's going to be better than Brian Daboll, even though Brian Daboll has struggled record-wise, over the course of the last 2 seasons? So I agree with you on this. I think where I start to try to unpack all of this is on the expectations. Like, the first thing I thought about is like, okay, so what are the expectations for next season? What are the expectations for this offseason? And now we're basically giving these two people who have a very short runway the keys to the franchise to make decisions for what should be the next 10 years of Giants football.
Yeah, so that's the interesting part about it, because let's get into here in a second why. I'll tell you why I'm okay with this, why this isn't the worst thing in the world for the Giants. but I have caveats, and I don't know if the organization is on the same page as me. We'll do that here coming up in just one moment. So as we roll along OGP, New York Giants not making any changes, at least at the highest level GM and head coach. We want to get into the coaching staff. Andy brought this up in our pre-show, which is important because there's a lot of coordinators on this staff that you might not think are doing much or have much value or are doing the best possible job. So we'll get to that in a second. One of the reasons why so here's a couple of things. One, if at any point in the first 4 weeks of next season, there is real chatter that Brian Daboll could lose his job early in the year, then we'll rewind back and this will be an unmitigated disaster because you cannot be ownership and say you're committed to this and this vision and then allow anything like that to come up. Doesn't matter if you agree, disagree, like or don't like Brian Daboll, barring him running on the field and pantsing his own players on punt returns, you cannot be in a position where you fire Joe Schoen early in the season next year. I don't even know. You probably have to be pretty far into a very bad season to consider firing him at all, because then it just erodes everything that you said in the statement at the end of the year here. That's one part of it. Now, my caveat why I don't think this has to be the worst case scenario is because my belief is what the Giants and what ownership should be saying to Joe Schoen and to Brian Daboll is, you have the 3rd overall pick. You are not drafting a quarterback. Not only because there's a good chance they're not going to be there if Sanders and Ward both go 1-2, though there's some speculation maybe Cleveland isn't going to go with a quarterback and they're going to take Hunter and do some different things. There's also still speculation about the Penn State quarterback, and if he came out, that would be golden opportunity, although many believe he would vault directly to number 1 on the big board for every single team. I personally would say, and I saw I think a poorly phrased statement about this yesterday. I think it was Ryan Dunleavy, and I'm not dragging him for it. But he said, they end up keeping both of them because it's their mess and they should have the opportunity to clean it up. And I compared that to the idea of, yes, when your child spills a glass of milk all over the kitchen counter and it drips onto the floor, that's your mess, son. You clean it up. When you're talking about an organization and a team and a franchise that needs, stability and needs a direction, I don't know if the guys that mess it up deserve to have the quote unquote opportunity to fix it. But nevertheless, prove that you can make the right decisions in the draft, that you can build a successful roster, because there are still, it's so easy, as we've done all year, to point at the quarterback and say, yeah, that was it. If only you had the QB. It's not true. There's a lot of holes in this team. There's a lot of holes in the roster. There's still a lot of questions about the coaching staff. Prove that you can have that stability, and we'll go from there. And that is directly tied to the fact that most don't look at the current quarterback class in this upcoming draft and say, these are the transcendent talents of the NFL that we've seen before. Good quarterbacks, certainly possible, but they are not those elite talents. So I would want that to be the caveat here that allows them to go to the season, and I don't think that's necessarily going to be the case.
Okay, so Adam, I'm going to put your mind in a pretzel right now, and I need you to figure out how this makes sense, because I am with you up until the point Mike Garafolo of NFL Network just went on maybe an hour or two ago after the news that Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll were being retained. He's a very, very well-respected, has ties to the New York Giants organization. Like, he knows what's going on. He said that Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll are, and I quote, essentially on a playoff or bust season next season for the New York Giants. So if that is the case,
do you want to pull up? You want to pull up next season's schedule of opponents?
Well, so Adam, the Giants have 17 games like every other team in the NFL. The only difference is the Giants have the hardest schedule in all of the NFL. Of those 17 games, 10 of them are against current playoff teams. So the Giants have one of the hardest schedules. They have no quarterback. And we're talking about, like, what's the long-term process and solution for this organization? If next season is playoff or bust for Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll, how on earth can you hand over a rookie quarterback to Joe Schoen and say, figure out a way to make the playoffs this year with this guy?
Yeah, so you can't, which is good. So my mind's not in a pretzel. Then and it's right where it needs to be. You're not going to draft a quarterback. There you go.
I think you and I are of the same mindset then, that if they decide to take a QB in this draft, then I cannot understand for the life of me what the organization and process is that the Giants are doing. Like, to me, it makes no sense. I've talked about my affinity for Matt Stafford before. He's the type of veteran quarterback that if you could get feels like he's on more of a timeline with Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll while you figure out what the long-term solution is at a different date. But like drafting Cam Ward or Shador Sanders and winning 3 games next year, like I don't understand how do they make it through that if what Garofalo is saying is true.
Yeah, and it's hard to, it's funny too, because I'm sure John Mara and ownership may look over at Washington and go, well, they got Jaden Daniels, and just like that, they became a very viable team, right? Won 10 games, So
they also got rid of their owner, they got rid of the GM, and they got rid of the head coach. But like
right,
maybe
but
they don't
John
want to
Mara,
look.
you know what I mean? He goes, I'm looking in the mirror. I'm seeing a lot of things I don't
The
like, but
details,
I
right?
like what I like what's happening right here. This is nice. I think this is nice. Yeah, we're only trying to push out a couple of caveats here. No, and so that's what I think is. That is what I think fans are failing maybe to recognize here that we're talking about, which is the idea is, well, now you'll, even though maybe you didn't want to keep Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll, but now so many pundits have said, like, now they get their chance with their quarterback. And I agree. They should have had their chance with their quarterback. But guess what? This organization is funky and they make dumb decisions. And you now in year 4, you know what I mean? It's like now they get their chance with their quarterback. Well, like, yes, but then that would make it, as everyone would say, a 2-year commitment then, because you're going to look at, well, does it develop pretty well? Wins and losses kind of don't matter as much if you develop a young rookie quarterback. But if you're a 3-win team again, are you now going to say that Brian Daboll is the head coach to continue the journey for Shador Sanders, for Cam Ward? Like, it only begets so many more questions as opposed to clarifying answers. So I find it interesting on that level how the Giants are going to approach this offseason and the decisions they're going to make. If you don't believe, and here's the problem, it's the purgatory of it all, right? And we know this. Now, one thing this is just a caveat that I need to give here. The fact that the Giants' only player that they brought in to develop at the QB position has been Tommy DeVito over the Joe Schoen regime, that to me is one of the most egregious things that you could say. Brian Daboll is a QB guru, and you don't go in the 4th, 5th, 6th rounds of the last 3 drafts if needed and grab a guy, see if it pans out. No good? Okay, next draft. We're going to maybe spend a pick. Okay, maybe next pick. I talked about Joe Milton. We saw him play some for the Patriots at the end of the season. I don't know what he's going to be. Everyone said he's going to need a lot of time to understand and get up to the NFL game and really be able to get into the nuances. Fine. But that's a team that's got their franchise quarterback and still took another flyer on a guy. Why? Because he might have value down the road, whether it is playing for you or playing for someone else. The Giants failing to do that puts them in this spot where now you maybe do need to. You got to go all out and go all in this offseason. How many more pieces do we need on the offensive line? How many more weapons do we need in the wide receiver room? How are we going to fix the defensive scheme here and what needs to happen? We'll talk about coaches here in a second, right? Like all that now comes down to Joe Schoen, and this is one of my biggest concerns about this is now Joe Schoen goes to the offseason with the cap space, and he gets to make all of these big decisions. And it's one of the ones that we reflected back on when it came to making the trade this past offseason and saying, yeah, on paper, getting Brian Burns is good, but now you got $30 million locked into him annually, and you're asking all these questions about why wasn't the defense good enough? Why wasn't the team good enough? And on we go. So that's the can of worms that keeping this regime together opens up potentially. Hey, if they start to go in the right direction and they win some games, yes, it will make it feel better. But if that playoff or bust benchmark is true, if that's a reality, I don't even think what I would consider to be a good season next year for this tandem is going to result in them being in the playoffs, right?
Correct.
Like, let's stop coming back here in 1 second. What is success for this regime next season? And what do we expect on this coaching staff to probably need to change to feel like there is more confidence in what this team is going forward? We'll do that here next. Okay, Andy, OGP, Giants sticking with Joe Schoen, sticking with Brian Daboll, no change from ownership. We'll get into the coaching staff here in a second, but I left it there in the last segment on what is success for you next year for this regime. Don't even worry about all the changes and anything that's going to happen, the signings, whatever it is. When the season ends, this team is 7-10. Are they keeping them?
It's impossible. It's an impossible question because it depends on what avenue they decide to go down during. Like if they win 7 games with Aaron Rodgers and there's no future quarterback, like for them to be able to hang their hat on and say,
so I'll
we
give you
can
2 paths
progress
because you're
from
right.
here.
Because you're right. They draft a rookie. They draft a rookie quarterback. What does it need to look like this upcoming season in order for them to be safe and secure? Or they go veteran. They go veteran heavy offseason. They go all in on it. What does that need to look like? To me, even if it's a rookie quarterback, I still need to have a team that's winning six football games at a minimum, because you need to be better. You need to prove that you're better, right? And if it's a veteran laden team, the point that I'm making here about playoffs or no playoffs is, even if it was a veteran heavy team and you went and got a veteran QB of some caliber, I'd still sit there and say, hey, if you went 8-9 and like we're in it the last 2 weeks of the season, or maybe you went 9-8 and just miss it, like that still wouldn't to me look like a lost season or a bad season. But there's this world where apparently John Mara is both showing confidence in the plan and also giving a big caveat of like, but my confidence is about you need to go to the playoffs, which, by the way, I get it. I kind of get where his head's at on this. I'm showing confidence because you're going to be 40 years in, and this thing better really turn around on a dime here.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, I'm struggling to see. I'm struggling to try to figure out like what a successful season is going to look like based on what we know today, right? Like,
Yeah.
I don't. We are devoid of talent across the board. We have no franchise quarterback. We are bringing back that same head coach and GM. If you go get a veteran QB, I think that you're looking at a 2-year timeline of Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll winning 7 or 8 games and having meaningful games late into the season in December would actually be progress for this team, because they've been a tire fire all year. At least you would have some like ability to sell tickets or ability to sell the fans. Our team is getting better. We have a veteran who is writing the shit.
Can the Giants do both? Can the Giants draft a rookie quarterback and go get veteran quarterback X? Like, do you think that they can serve both tracks here based on having $55 million in cap space, and maybe they'll make some moves with different rosters and contracts, et cetera? Like, because that, you mentioned that 2-year timeline. Like, I'm still gonna come back to like, okay, 2-year timeline, but the first, you still have to end year 1 feeling like year 2 is going to be the next phase of things.
Sure, they can. And the way that you do that is you pick two paths. Well, you pick one path with 2 different types of players. You either take a guy like Russell Wilson, a guy like Kirk Cousins, or even a guy trying to reclaim his career like Justin Fields, and you bring him in as the veteran QB that at least can start week 1, that is ready for you, that has had success in the NFL before. But then you also have to get your Shedeur Sanders, Cam Ward, Drew Aller. I mean, if you're going to go in the second round and you want Jackson Dart or Jalen Milroe or one of those, maybe that's the only way that you can sell this to the fan base of like, we are still trying to compete now while also having an eye on the future. But to me, like, I don't, what does that look like? If the veteran QB doesn't play well in the first half of the season is toast. And then what? You're hoping that like you go 500 with the rookie QB over the back half and say, now we're ready to compete the following year. Like, Adam, it doesn't make sense to me, because if you are drafting a rookie QB, the expectations are that your team is not going to be very good. And the only thing you're focusing on is developing that QB for the future. Look at the New England Patriots as a prime example of like, they only won four games this year, but they feel like they have their franchise quarterback and they are happy. Overall, they would consider that a success. Like, if the Giants win 4 games, but they have their franchise quarterback, if the mandate is playoff or bust for the organization, like how I can't get over that being the statement that comes out, and then them drafting a rookie QB and saying, well, this year's a developmental year for the QB. Like, it doesn't work like that in the NFL.
Yeah, by and large. I mean, now you can say it doesn't work that way, but then you look at Denver and you look at Bo Nix and you look at Sean Payton and you look at what they've accomplished, and you look at Daniels and you look at the Commanders and you look at what they accomplished. Now, I mean, the overarching premise is still the truth, right? We draft a rookie quarterback, we lower expectations. It's not just about wins and losses. It's about, is this player performing, developing, and do we believe we have our franchise guy? So there are some caveats to that, and it's a lot to hang on. And by the way, Joe Schoen, Brian Daboll, that's your problem. You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't matter to me if they're hanging out. Hey, it's going to be a heavy crown, and heavy lift in year 4. Oh no, woe are them. They're going to, they're really putting expectations on them. But if you draft a rookie quarterback, you're going to put a lot of expectations on them, right? And you're also, and that's fine. Franchise guys getting taken high in the draft class. That's what you want. You want that pressure. But there's just something to the idea of and this is why I come back to, you mentioned like a Russell Wilson. Is it going to be a similar thing to what Pittsburgh did this year? Russell Wilson's here. They didn't have the rookie quarterback, but we have this other quarterback here. Okay. Russell's going to start, hopefully win us a few games. Then when it comes time to go to our rookie quarterback, we still have those in the bank. And then it develops over the course of the season. I mean, maybe it's just hard for me to look at it, and maybe it's mostly because, again, the organization failed to bring in a young quarterback of any caliber that you would say, oh, we got little glimpses over these last couple of years of what they're capable of. I know you can point to Tommy DeVito, but even the best of Tommy DeVito is still not something that really ever excited anyone. So I end up looking at Brian Daboll and thinking, I remember when we hired you, what we thought and the expectations were going to be. And by the way, I know, let's end on this because I find this really fascinating to me. So Joe Schoen comes out and says, John Mara comes out and says, like, we believe in him. We're not going to make changes. Like, we believe in the vision here. Said that early in the season. And they still come back to it at the end of the year and say, and they're committed to them. I got to tell you, this show has not been a big Daniel Jones supporter, but boy, do I find it weird that you ended up jettisoning the best option you had at quarterback only to end up sticking with them. Remember, at the time, we thought, yeah, I guess F it. What's the difference, right? He's not going to be here. The next GM, the next head coach, make it Joe Schoen's mess. Make it Brian Daboll's mess. And then it goes out the door with them. But now that we're here, I'm not telling you, well, would it matter if Daniel Jones was there next year and you drafted Shedeur Sanders? He said, when Shedor's ready, he's going to come in. Until then, Daniel Jones continues to be our franchise punching bag. Fine. Like, I'm actually reflecting back on that now. It's like, wouldn't that just be a lot easier than having to go figure out something here? And if the mandate is playoffs or bust, then I get it. But you ended up winning that extra game. You ended up falling just out of the number 1 pick anyway. It's like all these things really factor in here. It continues to make it really hard for me to understand what is the goal or what is the vision and what has been enough from John Mara and ownership's perspective. When you look back over these last 3 seasons, what is it that cements you in the idea that you believe that vision that was presented to you when you hired Joe Schoen is still achievable? That's the thing that I'm having a hard time with. It's not any one decision, any one signing or whatever it may be. When you look at the whole picture, if I'm Mara, I'd be saying, so remind me again, how did the steps work here? And what does year 4 look like? It's really hard to sell on that.
Yeah, Adam. I mean, when you talk about the Daniel Jones piece, the only thing that makes sense there is the fact that there was injury guarantees. He would have had a big, salary that came in. And
totally.
The only way that you justify not having him here is to say, well, we could go with a bridge quarterback that costs a fraction of what the Daniel Jones contract would be. And if that's the case, fine. But as we've continued to see, there's more wrong.
You still played him. You still played him for X number of weeks. Like, I know it was talking about injury concerns. Like, you still risked it for so long. And then it was like, ooh, now we played lucky. We got lucky, and now we're going to jettison. You know what I mean? It's like, it's still, even that part of that was like, then why was he on the team to start the year? Why'd you let him see the field to begin with? But
they got to this weird spot, Adam, where he was good enough to maybe mess around and win a couple games, but not good enough
everyone
for
said
him
that,
to
but
be
they were
around
losing all the games. They were losing all the games. It's like, oh, we got to be careful. Daniel Jones might mess around and win a game. Will he? He went to Germany and lost to Carolina. I don't understand. Like, explain how even the best option the Giants had at quarterback was still someone that by the way, never did what Drew Lock was able to do a couple of weeks ago. I mean, we have a whole other conversation about how Drew Lock in one game achieved more than Daniel Jones did in his entire Giants career. That's neither here nor there, but please go on.
Yes. Well, so taking things off to the side, you talked about Daniel Jones. We talked about how we got into this mess. If you are John Mara and you look across the table at Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll and you say, who should be accountable for this? What is the answer to that question? Who's accountable for going from 9 wins to 6 wins to 3 wins and not having a quarterback of the future on the roster and having holes all over the place and the team not being competitive? If you're John Mara and I'm looking at you and you're Joe Schoen, like who should be accountable? Who is the reason why? Because if you're saying that those two are staying and they're part of the solution, are you saying that other people are the reason why we are in this situation?
Yeah, no, you can't. And I don't think Joe Schoen or Brian Daboll would say it, right? They're not going to sit there in front of John Mara and tell him, well, remember when this, whatever it may be. Now, behind closed doors, I think there's probably honest conversations about what was the discussion when it came to Daniel Jones. Did ownership say, hey, if you think you can make it work with him, and that gives Joe Schoen a little bit of leverage to kind of go, listen, we talked about it. You said you'd like to if you could have, and we went with it. And we thought we could make it work, and it didn't pan out. But all of our hands are dirty in those waters, right? When you fast forward, I'm even more surprised about this past off season where Mara would say, "Who's responsible for the Saquon Barkley thing? Where do we land on that? It doesn't matter whether you think you should have kept him or not, right? The Xavier McKinney, it's just talent leaving the building, right? I don't know. That's why I find it so interesting. I really do. Like, to be a fly on the wall of that conversation and have Joe Schoen explain why what's happened so far. Because you're never going to, the explanation for what things that don't work out is going to be, yeah, we tried and that didn't work out. So I don't think you're ever doing that. I think what you're always pointing to is what is working and what you believe is building the foundation that is going to lead to success, right? So Joe Schoen is going to try to sell on the fact, well, I signed the free agent offensive lineman. We can have a separate conversation about that. But he's going to say, and that's working. That's we're getting better there. That's a good thing. Our wide receiver room, it's got Wan'Dale Robinson in it. We've got, he's going to point to these players that he drafted, even though there's been a lot of misses there. He's going to point to Phillips. He's going to point to Newman, right? He's going to try to point to that handful of core guys that he'll say, this is a part of who we are. And seemingly John Mara buys into that. Like, he believes that. He believes that there's enough of those core pieces, those really cornerstone decisions have worked. And now it just is about, if we have our quarterback, if we have quarterback play of a certain caliber, then you'll see everything come to fruition. I think regardless of draft or veteran, I think that's probably the conversation is, if we get quarterback talent at a certain level, you'll see the difference every single week. Win or lose, you'll see the difference in the play of the overall team.
So, Adam, at the end of the day, we
Yeah.
are going to have a lot of time to talk about what they should do in the offseason in
boy.
terms of free agent signings, draft, etc. Remember, there's more than one round to the NFL draft. The Giants need to hit early and often on those picks.
Yes.
What I want to leave you with is we've gotten confirmation that Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll are going to stay.
Yeah.
We are still waiting to hear word on whether Mike Kafka and Shane Bowen are planning on returning to the Giants. There are indications, and this is from Dan Duggan, who said that, and others have said, in the interview, John Mara asked Brian Daboll, do you think you should be calling plays? Should we have someone that is very specific calling plays? And Brian Daboll, I'm sure, probably put back like, no, I'm the best man for the job. But John Mara indicated that that was a question that he had. In addition to that, he also indicated, and I think there was a quote that says, like, I'm tired of watching other teams run up and down the field on us. Like, don't think that bodes very well for Shane Bowen when he's like, why is this tire fire happening? My question to you is, if they both decided to come back, what changes over the course of the season? Do the Giants have to make a change at both defensive and offensive coordinator? Like, where's your head at as we start to go into the offseason, especially around the coaching staff?
Yeah, and I think there's a bigger conversation to have here, right? Who are names you'd want to bring in? What are the elevatable personalities from around the league? It's hard because if remember 2 years ago, we believed that Kafka wasn't good enough to be the OC, and that's why you get the play call taken away from you. Did we see enough this past year from Brian Daboll that, like, it seems like it's good enough? And if he stops calling the offensive plays, then how do we feel about him overall, like as a head coach, right? Because it's the offensive mind that matters so much. So I think Kafka will be gone because it doesn't really matter. Sacrificial lamb, that's fine. I know you're a big proponent, almost demanding that Shane Bowen be gone, which I'd be fine for him to be gone too. Like, it wasn't good enough. Nothing got implemented in a way that made a lot of sense. And that includes his own culpability in the fact that he said, you get me Brian Burns, it'll all work out. And then you look at the secondary and you say, well, there could have been some other names you should have thrown out there at the time. So, yeah, strip them away. Strip away coordinators. And again, that brings us right back to what? A couple of things. It'll be another new version of the offense, in some way, shape, or form, especially if you're going to give a play calling back. And then defensively, it's going to be your third defensive coordinator in 3 years now. And now it's going to be another new system and another new version of that. And then also the pseudo neutering of a coaching staff when you start to dictate that they need to move on from people. So it's fascinating to me. That maybe they should do it, but I, you know, what maybe they should have fired Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll, but they're going to be back. So I don't know where to set the expectations there. And it's not like we didn't hear word one all year long about Mike Kafka, right? So it's like it doesn't seem like he exists anymore. The Shane Bowen piece, I think, is far more interesting just because it's first year and what it's going to look like. I know you have strong feelings about that.
Yeah, random nugget about Mike Kafka. They found out that he has another year on his contract. When he became the associate head coach, where he got the promotion, but then got his play calling duties stripped from him, they added another year onto his contract. No one knows like what it is or what that says, which I find fascinating. Like I don't see a world that Mike Kafka wants to come back. It has to be a lateral move where he can at least call plays, is my indication on offense. And on the defensive side of the ball, it just wasn't good enough under Shane Bowen. What the heck happened to Bobby Okereke in his system is something that I have real questions about. And we just did not get enough good play. The defensive line with Dexter Lawrence still wasn't great. Adam, it was just the breaking news came in that Zach Taylor, the head coach of the Cincinnati Bengals, just fired Lou Anarumo, who is a name that I think the Giants should immediately have him on a plane to New York. Remember, keep in mind, if you're reading tea leaves, he was the defensive back coach of the New York Giants in 2018. Before going to Cincinnati, he spent 5 or 6 years in Miami, the same time that Joe Schoen was in Miami, so they have familiarity with each other. And also, he's a guy from Staten Island. Maybe that matters to you that he's a New York kind of guy. But I would actually be shocked if Lou Anarumo is not the next defensive coordinator of the Giants.
Yeah, I mean, why not Robert Saleh, though? I mean, why not? You know what I mean? There's probably plenty of names to point to. It'd be great if he ends up being him. Awesome. I know he has a good track record and he's done a lot of great things with defenses. Fine. Awesome. I'm not, by the way, I'm not grinding.
It takes two to tango, right? Does Robert Saleh want the job in New York being like, well, the coach and the GM are probably going to get fired too. So like, what does
Lou want the job in New York? You know what I mean? Like it's no matter, by the way, and this, we'll continue this conversation midweek. It's like, who wants to come be a part of it or not, right? Who wants to be here? Why did Shane Bowen come here? Were other people beating down his door? Was he the first choice for the Giants? No, he wasn't, right? It was, shoot, we missed that. We swung and missed on our first option. Who's our second option? So the same thing we talked about head coaches. If Vrabel will be the best, he's going to bring to the organization, blah, blah, blah. Well, he wasn't going to come here. He's going to go to New England. Lou, well, he'd be a great DC. But yeah, well, guess what? He ain't going to come here. So talk to me about the second or third options and whether or not we think that they make sense and can be functional for this team and help this defense get better and get back on track. All those questions, by the way, are asked of every single coaching position and every single position seemingly on this roster. So we come back in on Wednesday. Obviously, we'll be gearing towards playoff football, not for the Giants. We'll take a look at the draft a little bit, maybe start to have some of that discussion about what does a good first 3 rounds look like for the New York Football Giants in our eyes, and then look at the players. Who's leaving? Who's staying? Where are the contracts? There's going to be a lot of big moves that are going to happen here if this team is going to go from 3 wins to a reported playoff appearance as mandated by ownership. So we'll be doing all those things over on YouTube. Apologies for the last week and a half or so. I was dead. Andy came in and routed things out for you at the end of the week. We'll be back on track here as we move forward. Over on YouTube, One Giant Podcast, on your podcast feeds, One Giant Podcast, and on X at One Giant Podcast, at AMAC214 and at Adam Armbrecht. Until next time, until the best times, there has to be better times, as Andrew Makowitz would want, need, and demand the people know.
As always, let's go Big Blue.